The moment I stepped inside the courtroom, the past reached out and wrapped its fingers around my throat. I felt it before I saw them. That familiar pressure. That quiet warning in my chest that said be careful, the same instinct I had learned as a child when love came with conditions and silence carried threats. My parents were already seated at the plaintiff's table. They looked perfect. Too perfect. Vivian Hale sat with her back straight, hands folded delicately in her lap, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. Her hair was smooth, glossy, every strand in place. The faint smile on her lips was practiced, polished, and empty of warmth. Beside her, Thomas Hale leaned back slightly in his chair, confidence etched into every line of his face. His tailored navy suit fit him like armor. He looked relaxed, almost bored, as if this courtroom were just another stage and this trial another performance. Their eyes lifted together when I entered. And they smiled. Not the kind of smile that welcomes. The kind that warns. The same smiles that once froze me in place when I was too small to understand why my stomach tightened around them. The smiles that said behave, don't embarrass us, you owe us. They looked certain. Certain the outcome belonged to them. Why wouldn't it? To the world, Vivian and Thomas Hale were beloved public figures, sharp, articulate, admired. They built careers on telling stories, shaping narratives, presenting themselves as visionaries and survivors. They had followers, connections, power. And I was just the daughter they had abandoned. The child they had left behind without looking back. More than 20 years ago. I walked to my seat beside my attorney, my heels striking the marble floor with deliberate steadiness. Each step felt like a small act of defiance. Inside, my hands trembled, but I forced my shoulders back and lifted my chin. I would not shrink. Not today. Not ever again. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching dust in the air like suspended memories. The gallery murmured softly, journalists whispering, strangers leaning forward, hungry for spectacle. I was aware of every gaze. That's her. The granddaughter. The heiress. The girl who stole $1 billion from her own parents. If they only knew. I clasped my hands together in my lap, pressing my fingers tightly until the trembling eased. My pulse hammered so loudly it felt as if it echoed off the walls. Then the judge entered. Judge William Carter moved with calm authority, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression composed but alert. The room rose as one, then settled again as he took his seat. His gaze swept the courtroom with practiced precision. And then it landed on me. His eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned forward. For a moment, he simply stared. Not with judgment. With recognition. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, disbelief, something almost human breaking through the professional mask. He removed his glasses slowly, as if needing a clearer view, and drew in a breath that trembled just slightly. "Wait," he said. The single word sliced through the room. Every whisper died. Every movement stilled. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter. Unsteady. "You're her?" The silence that followed was deafening. I felt it settle over the courtroom like a held breath. Across the aisle, I saw my parents' confidence crack, not shatter, not yet, but fracture enough for fear to slip through. Vivian's fingers tightened around her pen. Thomas's jaw clenched. Because the truth they had buried for decades was rising. And it had a name. Mine. I was only 5 years old the day they erased me from their lives. I remember the heat first. The Santa Barbara sun was merciless that afternoon, bright, white, unforgiving. It baked the gravel driveway, shimmered against the iron gates, burned the air itself. Cicadas hummed in the distance, their sound sharp and relentless. But inside me, there was cold. A hollow, spreading chill I didn't yet have words for. I stood near the front steps of the estate, clutching a small stuffed rabbit to my chest. The fabric was worn thin from my fingers twisting it whenever I felt unsure. The breeze lifted my hair, carrying the smell of salt from the ocean below the cliffs. My mother crouched in front of me. Vivian Hale looked beautiful that day. She wore a white summer dress that fluttered softly around her knees, the fabric light and expensive. Her perfume, lilac and something sweeter, wrapped around me as she leaned closer. I would remember that scent for years, long after I understood how lies could smell like flowers. "Be good for Grandpa, okay, sweetheart," she said. Her smile wavered, just barely, at the edges. Her lipstick was too bright. Her eyes were too dry. I didn't know then what those details meant. I only knew something was wrong. "Why?" I asked, my small fingers tightening around the hem of her dress. "Are you going somewhere?" She hesitated. Just for a second. But even at 5, I noticed. My father stood a few feet away, leaning against their silver convertible. Thomas drummed his fingers against the hood, irritation written plainly across his face. He didn't look at me. He looked at his watch. "Vivian," he snapped, impatience sharpening his voice. "We're going to miss the flight." "Flight?" I repeated, panic fluttering in my chest. I tugged harder at my mother's dress. "Where are you going? Can I come?" For a heartbeat, she froze. Her smile faltered. "It's just a quick trip, darling," she said softly. "We'll be back soon." Soon. The word felt heavy even then. She didn't hug me. Instead, she leaned in close enough that her earrings brushed my cheek and kissed the air beside my face. Not my skin. Not really. Her heels clicked as she stood, the sound sharp and final, like the ticking of a clock counting down something I couldn't see. "Come on," my father said again. She turned away. The car door slammed. The engine roared to life. I stood there, frozen, as the silver convertible rolled down the driveway, tires crunching against gravel. I watched until it reached the iron gates. Until they opened. Until the car disappeared. Something inside me broke. I ran. I ran after it, my legs pumping, my chest burning, my breath tearing out of my throat in sharp, painful gasps. I screamed their names, my voice thin and desperate in the wide, open space. "Mom! Dad!" The gates stood unmoved. The car never slowed. I stumbled, fell hard against the gravel, skin scraping, tears blinding me. Dust and gasoline hung in the air. My rabbit slipped from my grasp. I cried until my throat ached. Until my legs refused to carry me any farther. Until the only sounds left were the wind and distant seagulls crying overhead. Then a shadow fell over me. A hand, large, warm, steady, rested gently on my shoulder. I flinched. Then I heard his voice. Low. Calm. Certain. "It's all right, my girl." My grandfather, Jonathan Hale, knelt beside me. He never moved quickly. Never spoke in haste. When he knelt, it was deliberate, as if the world could wait while he attended to what mattered. His grey eyes were soft with something that looked like grief and resolve tangled together. He brushed the dirt from my scraped knees, his touch careful, respectful. "They don't understand what they've lost," he murmured. His voice trembled not with weakness, but with restrained emotion. He tilted my chin gently upward until our eyes met. "You will never be unwanted again," he said. The words settled into me like a promise. He lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing at all and turned back toward the house. My head rested against his shoulder, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat wrapped around me, grounding the fear still shaking through my small body. For the first time that day, I felt safe. That night, he made hot cocoa himself. No staff. No ceremony. Just us. I sat at the kitchen counter, my legs swinging above the tiled floor, watching him stir the pot with quiet focus. The kitchen smelled like chocolate and warmth. "Extra marshmallows?" he asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I nodded, tears spilling over before I could stop them. He didn't comment. He never forced feelings away. Later, as he tucked me into bed, the house felt enormous. Empty. The grandfather clock echoed through the halls, each tick like a reminder of absence. "Will they come back?" I whispered into the darkness. He hesitated. Then his hand smoothed gently over my hair. "Some doors," he said carefully, "once closed, should remain shut." Before turning off the lamp, he added softly, "You'll never have to chase love again. From now on, it lives right here." I clung to his hand and believed him. That was the night I stopped waiting for my parents. And the night I began to belong. Life with my grandfather did not feel like rescue. It felt like being anchored. The morning after my parents left, the house was unchanged, sunlight still poured through the tall windows, the ocean still breathed against the cliffs below, the clock still ticked in steady rhythm. Yet everything inside me had shifted. I woke expecting absence. Instead, I found presence. A gentle knock came at my door at exactly 6 o'clock. "Up, Eleanor," my grandfather called softly. "The world doesn't wait for those who linger." I didn't understand the words yet, but I understood the tone. Calm. Certain. A promise that today would not swallow me whole. I slid out of bed, my feet cold against the marble floor, and padded down the hall toward the kitchen. He was already there, seated at the table, black coffee steaming beside him, the morning paper folded neatly in his hands. He looked up as I entered. "Sit," he said, not as a command, but an invitation. I climbed into the chair across from him, my legs too short to reach the floor. He poured me a glass of milk, placed a piece of toast on my plate, and slid the newspaper toward me. "Read this," he said, tapping a headline with one finger. "Then tell me what they're not telling us." I stared at the page, the letters blurring together. "I can't read all that," I muttered. A faint smile touched his lips. "Then start with what you can. Truth doesn't require perfection. Only attention." At 5 years old, I didn't know he was teaching me how to survive. I only knew he was teaching me how to think. Days fell into rhythm. Every morning, the same knock. Every breakfast, a quiet lesson hidden inside routine. He never spoke of my parents unless I asked, and even then, he never poisoned my thoughts with bitterness. "They made a choice," he said once, when I asked why they didn't call. "And choices reveal character." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," he replied, folding his paper carefully, "that people tell you who they are through what they do, not what they say." I learned early to listen. Not just to words, but to silence. The estate itself felt alive, watchful but not suffocating. The halls were wide, the ceilings high, the walls lined with portraits of people who had lived, loved, and failed long before me. But the house never felt cold. Because my grandfather filled it with intention. He believed structure was kindness. At night, he read to me history, philosophy, stories that didn't soften the world but taught me how to face it. He never lied to make things easier. He believed children deserved truth, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Power, he told me once as he closed a book and turned off the lamp, is not loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. The loudest people are usually trying to convince themselves. I carried that with me. As I grew older, the world outside our gates began to notice me. Teachers spoke in hushed tones when they learned my last name. Other children stared with curiosity, sometimes envy. Invitations arrived from families who wanted proximity to influence. My grandfather declined them all. "Your childhood isn't for sale," he said simply. Instead, weekends were spent at the community center he had built on the edge of town. He didn't just fund it, he showed up. He knelt beside children learning to read, his patience endless. He taught teenagers how to open their first savings accounts, how to budget, how to plan. He spoke to them not as benefactor, but as equal. I watched adults straighten their backs when he entered a room. Not from fear. From respect. When I was 10, he took me to his office for the first time. The city skyline glowed under the late afternoon sun, glass towers shimmering like a future I hadn't yet imagined. As we walked through the building, people greeted him with quiet reverence. "This is my granddaughter," he said to anyone who asked, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Someday, she'll ask better questions than any of us." I believed him. Not because I felt powerful, but because he never lied. He taught me to read contracts before novels, to understand systems before trusting them, to question motives, including my own. "Integrity," he said one evening as we walked along the cliffs, the ocean roaring below, "is what you do when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching." I learned discipline not through punishment, but expectation. He expected me to be honest, to be curious, to be accountable. When I failed, he didn't rescue me from consequences. He sat beside me while I faced them. Strength, he told me, is not avoiding pain. It's choosing not to be ruled by it. On my 16th birthday, he gave me the journal. It was small, leather-bound, worn at the edges. The pages smelled faintly of ink and time. "For your truth," he said quietly. "One day, the world will try to change it." I didn't understand then how desperately I would need it. But I felt the weight of it. The night I turned 16, I saw my parents again. Their faces flickered across the television screen, flawless and smiling on a red carpet in Los Angeles. They were promoting a new reality series about redemption, about finding oneself after hardship. My hands tightened around the remote until my knuckles turned white. My grandfather entered the room without a word. He followed my gaze to the screen. "Do you miss them?" he asked gently. The truth burned in my chest. But what I said was quieter. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Missing those who left is like staring at closed doors. You'll miss the ones still open." That night, I wrote in the journal for the first time. I wrote about abandonment, about safety, about the man who stayed. Years passed. The house aged gracefully. So did he. The tremor in his hand grew more noticeable. His steps slowed. But his mind never dulled. If anything, it sharpened. He prepared me without ever saying the word inheritance. He prepared me for truth. And when the morning came that I found him in his study, head bowed over his desk, glasses still perched above an open page, I understood why. Because he had known. He had always known. And he had made sure I would be ready. My grandfather died on a Tuesday. Not in a hospital bed surrounded by machines, not gasping for breath, not begging the world for mercy. He died exactly as he had lived, quietly, deliberately, with dignity. I found him just after sunrise. The house was still, the kind of stillness that feels intentional, like the world itself is holding its breath. His study door was slightly ajar, light spilling across the floor in a thin gold line. At first, I thought he was asleep. He sat at his desk, posture straight, one hand resting beside an open ledger, the other curled loosely around his pen. His glasses had slid halfway down his nose. The clock on the wall ticked on, indifferent. "Grandfather?" I whispered. No answer. I stepped closer. That was when I noticed the stillness wasn't peaceful, it was final. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just knew. Something in me closed, like a door locking from the inside. The doctor came. The staff gathered quietly. The house, which had always felt anchored, suddenly felt hollow, too large, too empty, echoing with the absence of the one man who had held it together. "He went peacefully," the doctor said. "Heart Quick. Peacefully. The word felt obscene. Peace was what he gave others. Peace was what he created. But for me, peace had just left the room and taken everything with it. The funeral was 3 days later. They came from everywhere. Politicians. Business leaders. Judges. Philanthropists. People whose names carried weight, whose voices shaped cities. They filled the chapel in tailored black, speaking in hushed reverence about legacy and honor. They called him a visionary, a pillar, a titan. I stood at the front, dressed in black, my hands folded neatly, my face composed. I had learned long ago how to still my emotions when the world demanded strength. What they didn't know was that he wasn't a titan to me. He was the man who woke me every morning at 6. The man who taught me how to question. The man who stayed. As the casket was lowered into the ground, I felt something tear inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. After the funeral, I returned to the house alone. Or so I thought. Their car was parked in the circular drive. A sleek, black luxury sedan I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered asking security to remove it. Then the front door opened. And there they were. Vivian Hale looked exactly the same. Impossibly polished. Perfect hair. Designer black dress hugging her figure like grief was just another accessory. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a split second, something like calculation flickered across her face. Then she smiled. "Eleanor," she said, stepping forward with open arms. "Oh my God. Look at you." I didn't move. Behind her stood Thomas Hale, my father, taller, broader, his expression carefully neutral. He nodded once, as if greeting an acquaintance. "We came as soon as we heard," he said. I stared at them, my parents, strangers wearing familiar faces. "You weren't invited," I said quietly. Vivian's smile faltered. "We're family," she replied quickly. "This is our home too." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "No," I said. "This was his home." She laughed lightly, as if I'd made a childish mistake. "And now it's time we talk about what happens next." They didn't ask how I was. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask about the man they had abandoned for over a decade. They asked about the will. The lawyer called the next morning. Daniel Ross had been my grandfather's attorney for over 30 years. His voice, steady and respectful, cut through the fog in my head. "The will reading is scheduled for Friday," he said. "I strongly suggest you're present." "I will be," I replied. When I arrived at his office, my parents were already there. Vivian greeted Daniel with forced warmth, touching his arm familiarly. "It's been far too long," she said. "Jonathan always spoke so highly of you." Daniel didn't smile. "We'll begin," he said simply. The room was quiet as he opened the folder. Jonathan Hale's will was thorough, precise, unemotional. He left donations to every charity he had supported. Trusts for employees. Scholarships. Endowments. Then Daniel looked directly at me. "The remainder of the estate," he read, "including all properties, assets, and controlling interests, is left entirely to my granddaughter, Eleanor Hale." Silence. Then, "That can't be right," Vivian snapped. Thomas leaned forward. "We're his children. That's not legally possible." Daniel adjusted his glasses. "It's very possible," he said. "And very intentional." Vivian's face flushed. "He was manipulated," she said sharply, her eyes flicking toward me. She was living with him. She had influence. I felt the accusation land like a slap. Daniel closed the folder. "There is a psychological evaluation on record," he said calmly. "Multiple, in fact. All confirm Jonathan Hale was of sound mind. This will stands." Vivian stood abruptly. "We'll contest it," she said. We won't let a child steal what belongs to us. A child. I was 25 years old. But to them, I would always be something small. Something disposable. The lawsuit was filed within 48 hours. The narrative was brutal and swift. They claimed I was emotionally unstable. That I had been isolated. That my grandfather had controlled and manipulated me, turning me against my own parents. They claimed concern. They claimed love. They claimed I wasn't capable of managing the estate. The media devoured it. Headlines painted me as a cold heiress. A fragile girl. A pawn. They smiled for cameras while questioning my sanity. I didn't respond. Not publicly. Daniel advised patience. They're trying to provoke you, he said. Silence unsettles people like them. So I stayed silent. I returned to my grandfather's study every night, opening the journal he had given me years ago. I read my younger self's words, raw and honest, filled with questions and pain. And I wrote. I wrote about betrayal. About grief. About the moment people smell money and call it family. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, I found a sealed envelope hidden behind a row of books. My name was written on it in my grandfather's familiar hand. Inside was a single letter. They will come when I am gone. They will tell lies. Let them. Truth does not need defense. It needs patience. I raised you for this. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back where it belonged. They thought they were attacking a grieving girl. They didn't realize they were stepping into a battlefield prepared by a man who never lost. And I was his final lesson. The lawsuit moved fast. Vivian and Thomas didn't just challenge the will, they attacked me. They painted me as unstable, isolated, and mentally fragile. Their lawyers filed motions questioning my competence, requesting psychological evaluations, and implying my grandfather had been manipulated in his final years. The media followed eagerly. Articles framed me as a reclusive heiress raised away from society. Cameras waited outside the gates. Commentators speculated about my mental health as if it were public property. I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, because my grandfather had taught me restraint. Daniel prepared quietly, dismantling their claims piece by piece, uncovering records that showed years of neglect, absence, and financial opportunism on my parents' side. Then came the hearing date. In court, Vivian wept on cue. Thomas spoke about parental concern. Their performance was polished, rehearsed, convincing. When it was my turn, I finally stood. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply told the truth about being left behind, about the man who raised me, and about the difference between inheritance and entitlement. The courtroom went silent. For the first time, they realized this wasn't a child they could overpower. It was a woman who had been prepared. The ruling came on a grey morning. The judge dismissed the claim of incompetence first. The evaluations were clear. There was no evidence of manipulation, coercion, or instability. The argument collapsed under its own weight. Then came the will. It stood. Every clause. Every signature. Every intention. Vivian stared straight ahead, her face tight and colorless. Thomas lowered his head, not in shame, in defeat. They had lost the story they tried to sell. The judge looked at me once before striking the gavel. Case dismissed. Just 2 words. But they ended years of abandonment, accusation, and entitlement. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. I didn't stop. I walked past them, past my parents, past the noise, carrying my grandfather's legacy not as wealth, but as proof that truth, when given time, always survives. The house feels different now. Not empty, settled. I still wake at 6. Not because I have to, but because some lessons don't leave you. I drink my coffee in his chair sometimes, watching the light move across the floor the way it always did. The estate is mine on paper, but in practice, it feels like stewardship, not ownership. I kept the community center exactly as it was. I expanded the scholarships. I funded programs my grandfather never had time to finish. Not to honor him, but because he taught me that legacy is action, not memory. I never spoke to my parents again. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Some doors don't need closure. They need distance. The journal sits on my desk, thick now with years of truth. When people ask how I survived, I think of one sentence he said long ago. Integrity is what you do when no one is watching. I live quietly, intentionally. And when the world tests me, as it always will, I remember. I was not raised to win battles. I was raised to endure them.